Hey y'all, it's Amber. Welcome to my channel. Whether you're a first time visitor, returning viewer, subscriber, welcome. I am happy to have you. So once again, we have a little bit of a different setup and I need to readjust you because one moment. I don't know if I went through my spiel, but whether you're a first time visitor, returning viewer, subscriber, welcome to my channel. Today, I am going to be taking a page out of Too Cool for Middle School. I think I have mentioned her in several videos lately, but I mean, I just love her. Anyway, she ended up doing a book last year that kind of caught my attention, and it was the favorite books in her classroom. So I decided that since I was going through all of my books anyway, why not do the same thing and share some of my favorite books that I have in my classroom. I am going to spend more time explaining some books than others. Some of them just have sentimental value to me as a student, therefore it has sentimental value to me as a teacher. And some I have read as a teacher and I just love them, and some my students have inspired me to read and to love because they love them so much. So some of these books I have not actually read, so let me just preface with that, but don't judge me. I will explain why they're my favorites as we go through them. Anywho, if you like haul videos, teacher content, book content, lifestyle content, all of the things, go ahead and hit that subscribe button down below. Join my Happily Amber After family. We are growing, we're expanding. We are happy to have you. There's more than enough room for all of us to dwell and exist. And once I hit my first milestone, I think that I am going to have a giveaway. So I look forward to hitting that milestone so that we can have a giveaway, and I will make sure to announce it once we hit it. Okay. Anywho, so let's get into these books. Now, I split these books up in two separate stacks. So first, I'm going to talk about the books that have been in my classroom pre-pandemic. And then I'm going to talk about some of my favorite books that I'm excited to add post-pandemic. So it may not necessarily, I'll explain when I got these books, because some of these books I did get before we shut down for school, but because nobody was at the school to check out my brand new books, they just sat on my bookshelves, you know. Anywho, my favorite books, let's kick things off on a high note. I love Disney. My students know that I love Disney. I'm just a Disney type person, and you know, I've just accepted and embraced that about myself. It's okay. So some of my favorite books that are in my classroom are a part of this Serena Valentino series, and I believe that I am missing one that came out last year, and that is, what is it called? I'll pop a picture up, but it's the one with Cruella de Vil. Anyway, so I have the entire series with the exception of that one, and these books are beaten down because they are frequently checked out by my students. Now, I did say I was going to order myself a separate set because I actually love these and I want to go back through and reread. And it's very rare for me to want to go and reread books that I've read, but I love this series just that much. Now, on the flip side, I have the digital copy of, I think, 5 out of 7 of these books. So I'm only missing 2 of the digital copies. So what I'm thinking is I'm not going to buy any more of the physical copies because we're running out of space here, okay? So I'm just gonna buy the other 2 digital copies and then I'll reread them from there, and then that way these can stay in my classroom, and I love them, and it's my favorite series. For those of you that may not know about the Disney villain series, this just simply tells a different perspective from the villains. Oh wait, there's another one that's about to come out. So there's Cruella de Vil, and there's a new one that's about to come out that I read through Nat Galley. I got an advanced copy, and that is, I'll pop it on the screen, but it's from the perspective of Lady Tremaine. And, you know, these books often leave me sympathizing with the villains. That one, yeah, it got me. But anyway, so these are, so it's 8 of them now. It's 8 of them. One of them hasn't come out yet, but there are 8. So I look forward to getting the other 2 physical copies and getting those in my classroom, as well as the other 3 digital copies for my personal library. Since we're on the Disney train, might as well keep it going. The next book that I have is the Disney book, A Celebration of the World of Disney. I have had 3 copies of this darn book. but my students loved them so much that they tore up one. So I have another one. And then I got myself one, and this is my personal copy. There's another Disney book of mine that is in the garage in my old apartment, and I'll pop that up on the screen, and I love that book. Unfortunately, I do not have a personal copy of that one. I just have the classroom copy, but I'm going to make sure to get myself a personal copy and let them keep that one because it has been heavily loved. My students tend to love my Disney books, I think because they're trying to understand why I love Disney so much. Next is a book that I had a connection to as a student, and I have a connection to as a teacher. Now, this book has previously been in my classroom. I am no longer going to put it in my classroom, just simply because I'm being very selective on what books I'm taking to school this year, just simply because I'm keeping in mind, if I have to pack up this classroom in 2 hours, how much stuff can I realistically pack up and grab? That's kind of where my mindset is. So though I love this book, none of my students checked it out. None of them read it. You can tell it still looks brand spanking new. That's how uninterested they were in this book. I loved reading Bud Not Buddy as a student, and it's about this boy who is going to connect with this man that he believes is his father, which turns out to be his grandfather. And one of the things that he says in here that I just love, and I say it all the time when I'm trying not to curse, is "You can kiss my wrist," right? Because that's what he used to say. Teacher humor. Anywho, that is Bud Not Buddy. Next is another book that I had in my classroom, but I am going to take it out because they're going to read it in high school, and this is a special edition, and I would be if something happened to it. Now, I'm thinking that this is probably going to go on my teacher bookshelf just because I want my students to be able to know their teacher as a reader. So I'm probably still going to take Bud Not Buddy as well, but these are not going to be books that my students are going to be touching. Okay? And I paid for them, so there's that. But anyway, this is a book that I read as a sophomore in high school, and I loved it. I loved the story of Their Eyes Were Watching God. It's a classic, obviously, and it's a book that I genuinely remember reading. I read a lot of books in my day, a lot of books. And so for me to keep coming back to this one, I have not reread it since I was in high school, and I keep saying that I am, but it's this story of being able to really come into your own and to love yourself, and you get to see what love is in the form of Their Eyes Were Watching God. So I love this book. It's one of my favorites. It's gonna be on my teacher bookshelf just for them to be able to get to know me, but they don't get to touch it. Next, I have The Everything That I Have Lost. And this is about a girl who lives in Texas. I live in Texas, born and raised, H-Time, going down. Anywho, she lives in El Paso and Mexico. So both her mom, and her brother, they have dual citizenship, but her father does not. He has Mexican citizenship. And so she kind of talks about his life their lives between Mexico and Texas, and how she kind of has that tug of war within herself. You know, she goes to Mexico, she talks like a white girl. She goes to Texas, she sounds so weird, you know, and she's going through all of these different things, and they both make up her identity. And she has some things that happens to her. I think it's like a slight trigger warning. To me, it kind of triggered a little bit, but it's not on the fence where I would still warn students like, hey, potential trigger warning, but it's no like violent assault, I guess I should say, that takes place, but it's still enough to make you uncomfortable, make you squirm a little bit. But anyway, so she kind of tells her perspective. She finds out about more of her dad's life and how that causes trouble for them, and they end up having to move to El Paso full time. But I really enjoyed this because it gave me a little bit of insight into a culture outside of my own. I think I tend to gravitate to a lot of authors or a lot of books that are written by Black authors. Even though I have a very diverse library, I do that intentionally, but I tend to gravitate towards experiences that are similar to mine, right? We look for books of people that look like us. And so this book prompted me to get it because I wanted more books of Latinx authors and representation, because I teach a predominantly Hispanic school population. And it was just really important to me to get more books that represent them. But of course, I wanted to read it before I put it on my classroom bookshelf, and I really enjoyed it. So this is The Everything I Lost, one of my favorite books in my classroom collection. Next, again, I want more voices of other people, and I have I Am Malala. I have seriously like 7 copies of this book. I think I've given some away, obviously. And we read about Malala's story of how she fought for educational equality for girls in Pakistan. In Pakistan, her father had a school, talked about how some of the schools were closed down for girls, and she went head to head with the Taliban. Most people know her for her story getting shot in her face by the Taliban on a bus. And she lived, recovered, the youngest Nobel Peace Prize winner. I just love reading about her story, and I think a lot of students like reading about her story, because they get to see like school is really a privilege and an honor. Like, we take it for granted here in America because it's required. But a lot of people around the world don't get the privilege to be able to go to a school. And even though our school systems are significantly flawed, we should still have a level of appreciation for our educational system and the fact that everyone is entitled to an education. And I'm gonna just leave it at that. So this is I Am Malala, one of my favorite books in my classroom library as well. Now, this is a book that I have not read, but my students, they checked it out so much, I had to buy a second copy. And I thought about just keeping this on my bookshelf, but why deprive them of a book that they want to read? So this is Dear Martin, and I do have the other one, Dear Justice, in one of these bins as well. I bought because, like I said, they checked out that Dear Martin book so much, like they tore it up. I still have it in my classroom and it's still going back, but I got the second copy as well just so that they can be able to use it. And he's the student, an honest student that finds himself in trouble with the law. And unfortunately, it's just telling about the experience that a lot of the Black boys, Black young men in this country have to deal with. And Nick Stone is a very prominent Black author. I have a lot of her books, and I keep saying that I'm gonna sit down and I'm gonna read it. I'm gonna sit down and read it and sit down and read it, and I will. But this is my favorite just simply because it is my students' favorite. This is arguably the most checked out book that I have in my classroom library since I've been a teacher. Love that. Next, I have my collection of Sarah Dessen books. Now, I love Sarah Dessen a lot in middle school and high school. I read a lot of her books. I have a friend named Taylor, hey girl, who she would get her mom to buy her books. Like, we were reading buddies. Like, reading buddies. That was me and her, reading Pretty Little Liars, reading Sarah Dessen books, you know, all of these things. And it's so funny because I think about, I was looking at something and it said that parents tend to buy their children's gifts that they want them to have. And it's so true. Like, the same goes with my library. I buy books that I feel like my students should want to read, and they don't always want to read it. Nobody has checked out a Sarah Dessen book, but you know what? They're still going back to the classroom, and gosh darn it, somebody's going to read these books and somebody is going to like it. I love Sarah Dessen. I keep saying that I'm going to go back through and I'm going to reread her books. I have maybe about 7 of her books. I only have 3 right here because they're kind of spread out everywhere. But I definitely am going to continue to push and emphasize Sarah Dessen books because I love them, and I just want my students to love them as much. So these are kind of like a sentimental thing for me. Next is The House on Mango Street. This is the very first book that I taught as a teacher. Now, granted, I came about halfway through the book and it is full of vignettes. And we have this family who has this house on Mango Street. Through the vignettes, we get to learn more about the experiences of Esmeralda. Is that her name? Esmeralda? Anyway, our students read this in 7th grade, and I just have a sentimental connection to this book just simply because, like I said, it's the first book that I taught. And even though they read it in 7th grade, I still have some students that come back to it and want to check it out again to read. And that is totally fine with me. If you want to reread the books till the cows come home, as long as you read it, who am I to complain? So this is The House on Mango Street. Y'all, I read a lot of books a year, and it's really, really hard for me to remember specific characters and every little thing about every little book. So if you're one of those people that just really gets bothered by that, apologize in advance, but it is what it is. Next, I have my Romeo and Juliet graphic novels. I actually am missing one. I don't know where the 3rd one is, but it is around here somewhere, I am sure. So I have 3 graphic novel editions of Romeo and Juliet, and I have no shame, and they're my favorite because I love teaching Romeo and Juliet. Even though for the past 2 years, it has not been as great as my very first year, but that's okay. It's okay. It's all right. My students love to read it, and that is what it is. And then my next book that I have previously had in my classroom that I have loved and enjoyed is All American Boys, and it's about this situation with police brutality. This young boy is in the store. He's accused of stealing chips This white officer, you know, hems him up, beats him down. The guy's father is a police officer or something like that. It's just horrendous. He has an older brother who doesn't get along with the father because the father's beliefs of like very militant is the best way I'm going to put it. And there's a white student who witnessed this entire thing and recorded it, but he is afraid to say something at first until guilt eats away at him, because he's actually family friends with the cop who battered this young boy. And so he finally decides to speak up and tell the truth about what happened. And the families, of course, fall out. It's a mess. But anyway, this is All American Boys, one of my very, very, very favorite books. Jason Reynolds is one of my favorite authors. I believe there are only 2 books that he has written that I do not currently own because I love him that much as an author. And I am going to continue to collect his books until he stops writing them. So this is All American Boys. Now we're going to kind of shift gears a little bit to the books that I have owned either since the pandemic started and students have just not had access to it, or they are brand spanking new to my collection. Either way, let's get through them. This video is already getting kind of lengthy, so I'm gonna pick up the pace in a little bit. So speaking of Jason Reynolds, I told you that I have most of the books that he has ever written, and that includes Stamped Remix of Racism, Anti-Racism, and You. We have several copies of this book. I actually have a signed autograph copy of this book. I think this is actually the signed copy. Yes, it is. So I was actually supposed to go, when this book first was released, I was supposed to go to a conference with Jason Reynolds, but literally the week before this conference was scheduled to take place, that's when the world just like shut down completely. He still signed the book, sent them over to my school, and I was able to get a copy. But it's so important for young people to understand what racism and anti-racism looks like, what segregation is versus assimilation is versus integration is, all had in common. And this is like the young reader's version to Stamped from the Beginning by Ibram X. Kendi, which is why Dr. Kendi's name is on here as well. I really enjoyed it. I think I read this book in one sitting. It was that good. Stamped, it's a little thickums, but I'm committed to read it this year because I think it's important to know. Next, I have Say Her Name by Zetta Elliott, and these are poems to empower. Oftentimes we leave out the story of women who are killed or face and encounter police brutality. Think about Breonna Taylor, think about Sandra Bland, you know, think about women who don't always get acknowledged for the brutality that they face. I think about that lady in Baytown that recently got shot, you know. I'm not gonna say myself, but anyway, Say Her Name is full of poems and poetry dedicated to these women who face police brutality and may not get the same recognition. Say Her Name is a hashtag for those women who have faced brutality, whose lives may have been ended at the hands of police officers. And it's important, while we want to holler Black Lives Matter, of course, and I'm not going to say anything divisive because I think a lot of people have tried to already undermine the purpose and intent behind the Black Lives Matter movement. It's also important to shine a light on the women who are facing these things and just let everybody know, like, we are in this together and Black Lives Matter, period. Next is a book that is brand new to my collection, and I meant to put it in my last book haul, but it fell through the cracks. This is another graphic novel that I got, and this is The Black Panther Party. I read this the day that I got it, and oh my gosh, it gives so many of the myths and misconceptions that the media tends to spew about the Black Panther Party, and also gave some information that I wasn't aware of. And I pride myself on knowing a lot about the Black Panther Party, and I definitely learned something new here. And we got to learn more about people who played prominent, significant roles behind the scenes, and kind of like how Huey Newton's paranoia kind of helped to speed up the process of disassembling the Black Panther Party, and how it played a significant role in spreading to other cities, and kind of like where it came from, and who was inspired by Stokely Carmichael. It was obviously inspired by Malcolm X and Stokely Carmichael and the point program that Stokely Carmichael had. I can't remember what it's called, but that's what it was based off of. Anywho, so this is the Black Panther Party, and I'm excited to have this so that my students can learn too, because we kind of hint at the Black Panther Party during our Malcolm X unit. Since he was a direct inspiration for them, I think it's important for them to recognize that what they get in the media is not necessarily what is true about the Black Panther Party. Some of it is, but a lot of it is just a misunderstanding, and the media doesn't do a good job of filling in those gaps. So I'm excited about that. That's one of my favorites. Another one is a sentimental favorite. I read a lot of Neil Shusterman, a lot of Joan Lowry Nixon, a lot of Lois Lowry when I was in middle school, more specifically 5th, 6th, and 7th grade. And Full Tilt is a book that I remember reading now. I have another copy of this book, and it is a little bit dingy, so I guess I forgot that I bought a new copy of it. And it's this one, and it's another one. The girl has it's like Medusa with the little locks. Anywho, I gotta get that one too. But I used to love reading these books when I was younger. This is actually what kind of would grip and keep my attention. I love mystery books. That's why I like to read a lot of James Patterson books. A lot of mystery, suspense, psychological thrillers, not necessarily a horror book reader, but thrillers I am all for. And this kind of sparked my love for it. And this is about these boys who go to an amusement park, and that park is not what it seems. And so I'm excited to put this in my classroom. Not exactly sure if my students are going to be interested in it, but it's a favorite of mine because it was a favorite of mine when I was their age, and hopefully it sparks their love of reading. Next, I have The Black Kids. I identify with this somewhat. So I grew up in a maybe upper middle class family, not always, but for a good majority of my life. And this girl goes to a predominantly white school. She lives in a very wealthy neighborhood, and hold on. The Black Kids is one of the favorite books. It has quickly become one of my favorite books that I have read ever, and I'm excited for my students to be able to get to read this book as well. And it takes place during the Rodney King riots, and so we kind of get this perspective of this student. Can't remember the names. Next is The Invincible Summer of Juniper Jones, and this is a book that I got at the start of the pandemic. I got to read this early on NetGalley, and I fell in love with it. It's about this biracial boy who goes to the South to spend some time with his family and reconnect. He lives predominantly with his dad. His mother lives in the South, but he goes to stay with his aunt and uncle, and he ends up bonding with this white girl, Juniper Jones, and she is a bit of an outcast, even though she is white, because she is just very different. She lives with her grandmother who is sick, and they just end up bonding over the summer. And I just really love this book because you get to tell of this biracial boy who is just seen as black, and this white girl who is just seen as weird, and how they get to bond, and how he experiences being black in the South despite being raised by a white man, despite going to stay with his white aunt and uncle. And I really enjoyed this. This book brought me to tears, especially the ending. But I really think that this is a book that my students are going to love and enjoy as well. And then next I have Punching the Air by Edie Zaboy and Yusuf Salam. And Yusuf Salam is one of the Exonerated Five. And this book is written in verse. And it just kind of tells about the experience of a boy who is wrongfully accused of a crime that he did not commit, which is the same thing that Yusuf Salam, Dr. Salam, goes through. He is accused of the Central Park rape and brutality of this white lady, and he was innocent. He did not do it, but him along with 4 other gentlemen were wrongfully convicted of this crime and later were exonerated and settled with New York. But anyway, so I think that this is a book that is relevant, especially because when we talk about To Kill a Mockingbird, we're going to make this connection to the Exonerated Five, and I think that this can provide background and context for students who may read this book before then, or even may have curiosity sparked as a result of talking about it during To Kill a Mockingbird, and how this is still relevant today, how we have so many people of color, that especially black men, that have been locked up and convicted and accused of crimes that they did not commit and were not around for, just simply because they happened to show up at the wrong place at the wrong time, and then got all of these crimes pinned on them, losing years of their life in prisons only to be released with no apology. Anywho, so that is Punching the Air. Next, I have another Jason Reynolds book, Long Way Down, the graphic novel edition. I do have the regular novel edition that is going to be in my classroom, and it's in one of these bins as well. But I read the graphic novel. I haven't read the full novel, but this one makes me want to read it. And it's about this boy who spends 60 seconds on the elevator, even though this doesn't look like 60 seconds worth. And his brother is killed. He's going to avenge his brother's death. So he meets all of these people on his way down, And essentially they're trying to stop him from wasting the rest of his life by going to avenge his brother's death. And I really enjoyed it. I think that my students would be able to connect with it. I would, if they're in a period of grieving, not necessarily sure that this is a book that they should pick up. But anywho, I think that this is a good book about resilience and learning to grieve and deal with pain, and just recognizing that sometimes a part of the grief process is anger. And then last but not least, I have this book, Woke, a Young Poet's Call to Justice. So we have this poet on the front as well as this poet on the back. And this book is filled with poetry from various authors of various backgrounds: Mahogany Brown, Olivia Gatwood, Elizabeth Acevedo. And they write this poetry, you know, talking about some of the experiences of injustice in America. And you have all of these graphics to go along with the poetry, talking about intersectionality, activism, ableism, body positivity, equality, forgiveness, freedom fighters, gender, immigration resistance, all of those things. I really enjoyed reading this, and I think that my students would enjoy this as well as another quick read. So thank you for joining me. If you have stuck around this far, go ahead and give this video a thumbs up. If you have any book recommendations for me or any questions, comments, or concerns, feel free to leave them down in the comments box below. I will try to leave links to all of these books down in the description box through Bookshop. If they don't have a Bookshop link, then I will just simply mention the book and you can feel free to go order it on Amazon. But with that being said, I will see you next time. Bye, y'all.
I promise you, 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 I promise you.